Okay. Oh yeah. Now I'm on. Good morning. Morning. It's always good to be with you on these mornings like this. I always look forward to our time together, and particularly this morning, I'm excited about these events in Jesus' life we're going to look at because they're two of my favorites. I think. It seems like I say that just about every week, but there are a lot. I have a lot of favorites in Jesus' life, but these two particularly stand out to me. Um, if you think back to last week, where we left Jesus and the disciples, they were kind of on a high point in Jesus' ministry, or seemingly so. This is, multitudes are coming to Jesus by the thousands. He's teaching them. On this occasion, he has fed them with just a boy's lunch, the loaves and the fishes, and multiplied those to the people. And so, where we pick up the life of Jesus this morning, it's evening time. The people are sitting on the grass. They're fat and happy, as we like to say. Everybody's been fed. And some of them have even made the connection, a spiritual connection to what Jesus is doing here, that truly this is the prophet who is to come into the world. So they're making some good conclusions from what Jesus has been showing them and doing with them. But while Jesus has been active, Satan has also been active here. There's a problem with this situation as well, because Jesus perceives this large group of people, these thousands, are not just content to eat the bread. They have some ideas that are formulating, and Jesus perceives that they're about to forcibly try to make him king. And I can kind of follow their thinking. Here's a guy who can, heal the sick and the injured, raise the dead, can feed a veritable army of people with just a few, loaves and fish. This seems like a good guy to kind of hitch our horses to and overthrow the Romans, right? They want to make Jesus this person that they that they think he's supposed to be. But of course, right there you can tell they don't really understand Jesus. They don't understand who he is. If they think they're going to force Jesus to do something, then they don't clearly understand Jesus. And so Jesus reacts to this situation. He makes his disciples. It's almost like he compels them to get in the boat and sail across. Just go. And they leave without Jesus. Why would Jesus do this? Why would he send them away so abruptly? Okay, he has a plan for what's about to happen. Yeah, and we'll see that this morning. And I think he quickly wants to separate the disciples from this crowd that's kind of thinking in this direction, right? Let's force Jesus to be our king. And the disciples, I think, are very vulnerable to this, just like the rest of the people, right? They're expecting a different king than Jesus is. So Jesus doesn't want his disciples to get kind of caught up in the fervor of the moment, right? and go with the crowd. So after Jesus loads up the disciples, sends them away, he turns and disperses the crowd. Kind of just go on your way, nothing to see here, I guess. And by now it was evening when he fed them, so it's probably dark. And then he retreats up the mountain to pray. So, everybody being gone, the disciples being gone, Jesus being gone, they probably kind of fizzled out and dispersed. Mm-hmm. It will come up very soon, next week actually. So, yeah, yeah, he, yeah, it'll come up. He this morning he'll cross the sea again, and the people will start regathering. Um, and at that time, he starts to teach some of those harder things of, eat my flesh, drink my blood, this kind of bread of life conversation that we'll see next week, sort of disabusing the people of these notions they have, and kind of culling the herd a little bit of who's going to follow him and who will fall away, following him just because they got fed. Excuse me. So at this time, Jesus goes up on the mountain alone to pray. And this is something I really appreciate about Jesus. Being an introvert myself, I appreciate the alone time that Jesus takes. I have questions about whether Jesus was an introvert or an extrovert or both somehow, but it's an interesting thing to contemplate. And Jesus on this occasion spends all night in prayer. And again, we see this is a habit of Jesus, right? Jesus, sometimes he gets up early in the morning and goes to pray, so he can catch some time just by himself with the Father. Sometimes on this occasion, he stays up all night, or he stays up late on other occasions. Personally, I find it easier to be frequent in prayer than lengthy in prayer. I don't know about you, but both of these kinds of style of prayer are exemplified by the Lord and by others. We'll see another great short prayer this morning in a little bit. But on this occasion, Jesus has a lot going on. I think he has a lot to talk with the Father about. Remember what's been going on. John the Baptizer has recently been killed. They've received news of that. So Jesus is dealing with the loss of his family member, and this righteous man of God has been killed at the hands of an evil king. The crowds don't understand him. He does these amazing things, the feeding and healings and things, and they don't really understand. His disciples don't really understand. The Pharisees are hounding him at every turn, even kind of blaspheming what he's doing, saying, oh, he's using the power of the demons to cast out demons and so forth. So, it seems like there are a lot of headwinds going on in Jesus' ministry at this time. He must have been frustrated, I think, at this time. So, a lot to talk about with the Father, and Jesus does that on this occasion. Well, there are other headwinds here, because meanwhile with the disciples, they're rowing across the Sea of Galilee against the wind. The wind is contrary, it says. They've been struggling at the oar, struggling at the rowing for many hours by this point, actually. And on this occasion, Jesus isn't in the boat with them, right? He sent them on ahead by themselves. And now another storm starts kicking up. The wind is blowing across the waves, chopping them up, buffeting the boat around. It's the nighttime. It's a scary kind of situation for the disciples. Well, you've been rowing for hours. You're tired. The weather is against you, and all of a sudden, you see a figure, and you can't tell who it is, really, right? And this figure, it says they all see it. They all see him. And this figure, at first I would think, well, there's another boat out there, maybe. But you look a little closer, there's no boat. This person's not in a boat. How do the disciples react to seeing this? Okay. Yeah, they're afraid. They say it's a ghost. It's some kind of, apparition, a phantom, or, whatever they're, it's a, I don't know if it's the spirit of a dead person they're thinking, or, some ghostly figure, right? I can't say that I particularly blame them for what they're seeing, because they haven't identified this person, right? They don't know who it is. Fairly terrifying. But then they hear the voice. Right? This person calls out to them and says, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Why would this be comforting to them? Great. Oh, yeah, exactly. I like that word. We'll look at the reality, spiritual reality. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, Mark tells us kind of at the end of this passage, they hadn't really learned the lesson of the loaves and the fishes. They hadn't really processed it. And I think this event kind of recontextualizes who this Jesus person that they're following really is. One of the things about this phrase, I think there's a lot packed into what Jesus says here. First, he says, take courage, or some translations say, be of good cheer. And this is a phrase used often by Jesus. It's kind of a Jesusism. It's almost a catchphrase in some ways, And in fact, we should do a study on this sometime, but in fact, through the Old Testament, God often uses similar phrases to Joshua, for instance. Take courage. And notice on this occasion, Jesus doesn't calm the storm. He doesn't turn to the storm and say, peace, be still. He calms the disciples instead. Right? The test is different this time. This phrase, it is I, our English translations have kind of smoothed over the grammar a little bit there on that verb tense. It's more literally, I am. Where would this, what is this reminiscent of when Jesus says, take courage, I am? Okay, yeah, from the burning bush, right? God says it to Moses. Moses says, you're sending me to these people, to Pharaoh. Who am I supposed to say sent me, right? And God says, I am that I am. You tell them, I am sent you. And like I said, this verb tense is a little strange, right? It doesn't feel right. But it's because this is indicative of like the self-existent one. This is God who has not been created but has always been, right? The Alpha and the Omega, the one who was and is to come, all kind of wrapped up in this phraseology here. So Jesus is making a powerful claim for his deity here to the disciples, just in his words. Also, it's not just in Jesus' words that he's telling them who he is, right? There's some historical context to this. I just pulled out an example, a Jewish example. In the book of 2 Maccabees, which is not a biblical book, but a book written in the intertestamental time period, contains some kind of historical Jewish writings, non-inspired, but it gives us a view of what the Jews were thinking in a couple of centuries before Jesus. And just as an example, they're living under Antiochus, another evil ruler. They live under a lot of them over the years, of course. And the Maccabees are a family that is against this ruler, and they write about him, thinking through pride that he might now make the land navigable and the sea passable on foot. Right? He's accused of this hubris, this, you think you can do the impossible kind of thing. And there are other examples of this, of this phrase, like you're walking on the water, you're trampling the sea kind of thing, as being this impossible task, as kind of a colloquialism. Well, if you look over in Job says of God, he alone spreads out the heavens and treads on the waves of the sea. So who are we to believe that this person who's treading on the waves of the sea is. Is this another prophet from God? When they concluded the night before, this is the prophet who is to come into the world. That's true, but that's not the whole story, is it? Jesus is not just another in the long line of prophets over the centuries, right? Jesus is God himself. Right? He says it in his words, the I am, this softer indicator in the phrase, take courage. And then this demonstration of, I think, his true nature, more of the spiritual reality, I think. I like that, Greg. Of God walking on the waters. The Spirit of God hovered over the waters, right? About to start creation. Jesus, all things that were created through him as well. So, being over the waters, being in charge of the waters, being the master of the waters is all God's wheelhouse alone, right? He parts the waters. God does many things with all kinds of waters through Scripture, and here he comes walking on them. Well, Peter's never one to stay out of the action for very long, right? And I love Peter here. This is part of what makes it one of my favorite, top moments in Jesus' ministry, because Peter says, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the waters." This is a great deal of faith, in my opinion. Jesus says it's little faith, but from my perspective, it's quite a bit of faith, right? You can imagine Peter, the fisherman. He knows the waters. He knows the danger here, right? The wind is still blowing. The waves are still chopping at the boat. And yet Peter puts his feet where his faith is. He steps out. First one foot, kind of get a feel for it maybe. Get the second foot out. And you kind of let go of the side of the boat. I can just see Peter doing this. And I'd love to ask Peter what that was like. What was that sensation like? But Peter has enough faith at this point to get out of the boat. We need to have enough faith to get out of the boat. We often don't see, how things are going to work. And if we do, we're probably wrong, because we're not really. We can't foretell the future, of course. So we need to be able to step out on faith. And we're never going to be able to do that until we step. Right? Faith is a walk. Faith is not asymptomatic. You don't say, "Well, I have faith, but I stay in the boat at all times." You have to step out on faith and let it support you. Yep, Terry. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, he doesn't turn to them and say, "You have no faith," to the others in the boat. They do seem to have, I think there's a moment of personal growth for each of them, though, because they make a conclusion about Jesus at the end here, right? That Jesus is the Son of God. And, perhaps he doesn't want to kind of squash that moment by reprimanding them. They seem to learn a lesson from this. Well, of course, Peter's walking on the water toward Jesus. Everything looks like it's going great. This is wonderful. Peter, he's got to be a little elated / afraid. I don't know. A lot of emotions here. But of course, Peter looks around. He sees the wind. Well, he sees the effect of the wind on the waves. Right? He notices the situation he seems to be in. And he starts to sink. Why does Peter start to sink? Sorry, Chris? He took his eyes off Jesus. Yeah. Yeah. So, Glenn, okay. Glenn got the right answer as well. Yeah, he took his eyes off Jesus. In a moment, Jesus will say, why did you kind of split in two, Peter? And we'll look at that. And this is so human. This is so, Peter is standing in for all of us, I think, when, yeah, sometimes we can step out on faith and we start walking, but we start sinking after a while, right? We start looking around and, we think there's a lot of chaos out there, right? There are forces that are bigger than me, right? Beyond my control. I'm out of control. There's nothing I can do. But in those moments, is reality sinking in, or is faith seeping out? Right? Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to, think about that reality, right? Like, how much is it reality that things are not in control? It's reality that things are not in my control, certainly, right? That's the truth of it. And sometimes we're deluded the other way, thinking that it is. That's a pretty powerful delusion that we often operate under. But the ultimate reality, the spiritual reality, is that there is a God in heaven. And this God loves each of us individually and cares for us and is compassionate towards us. And not only that, but he has our best interests in his mind and in his heart better than we do for ourselves. And this God who cares and loves us so much is in control of everything. Right? Better than our parents ever were when we were kids. Right? Better than we are in charge of our lives right now. That's the reality. And realizing that helps us to step out on that faith. Linwood? Yeah. Yeah, the cares of the world taking your faith. Yeah, certainly can, if we let it, right? If we take our eyes off of Jesus. Terry? Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, certainly Peter, I think Peter acknowledges he can't do this himself, right? He says, if it is you, you command that I come. And he's trusting in Jesus, not like, I think I can do this too. Bloop, right into the drink, right? Chris? If Jesus had told the lame man. Hmm. 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 a healing that there's no explanation for. That Jesus active in his life. Yeah, I think when we see how Jesus has been active in our lives, it does strengthen our faith, and we can walk with Jesus in his footsteps. Greg? Mhm. Yeah. 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 Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Peter takes his focus off Jesus. As I said, Jesus kind of says to Peter, "Why did you split?" Right? He says, "You have little faith." Well, we'll go back a moment. Peter starts to sing, and as I said, he prays a great prayer, I think. Just, "Lord, save me." Right? Kind of a staccato prayer, not an all-night prayer like Jesus, but still a good one, right? And I appreciate that, because sometimes my prayers are one or two words, Um, and it's beautiful how Jesus reacts. He immediately reaches down, grabs Peter, stabilizes him, right? Peter has turned to the right person at the right time, right? He's admitted his helplessness. So when Jesus pulls Peter up, he has a few words for Peter. And I don't personally picture these words as being really, condemning, but he does have some criticism, some, I think, gentle criticism for Peter. He says, "You have little faith. Why did you doubt?" But of course, there are 11 guys in the boat still, right? That he doesn't really, Jesus doesn't turn to them and say, "Oh, you faithless, worthless disciples, you see, you got to have a little faith." I think they kind of got that. And elsewhere, Jesus teaches, if you have a little faith, it's powerful, right? Because the power is not in the believer, it's in the faithful one, right? This is not, this is not a linear relationship like, you just have a little faith, you're going to be able to do little things, right? But the faith, just a little faith can say to the mountain, "Be uprooted and cast into the sea," and it happens. Well, this question Jesus asks is interesting. He says, "Why did you doubt?" And that word doubt is like, why did you split in two, as I've been alluding to? Or why were you two-minded about this? So again, Jesus is indicating you need to be focused on me. We need to have a singular focus on the Lord to maintain our faith, to walk by faith. And so often we focus on the wrong things, right? We become afraid of the things that are created rather than the Creator, which is something he warned them about, previously when they were about to be sent out. Was there a question? I heard so. Mm-hmm.
I'm reminded of Shadrach, well,
Yeah.
throw us in there. It doesn't matter. Our God can save us, and even if He doesn't, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And I think for me, so much of the things happening in the world tend to, what's going on? What's happening? That's not real.
Right.
It's happening, but it's not real. If you got your eyes on Jesus, it's not real. It doesn't make any difference what they're doing in D.C., what they're doing in anywhere. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Because I follow the Creator.
Yeah. It's in his control.
He can say the same thing to me. Where's your faith?
Yeah.
Paul, where's your faith? Well, same thing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, I don't think this is a rhetorical question from Jesus, right? I think Peter must have carried this moment for the rest of his life. I think this would have been a frequent memory that he pulled up. Why do we doubt? It's really, I think it's something to analyze and work out. Like, what is the driving factor of our doubt? When we don't step out on faith. Or maybe we do step out on faith and then falter. Why did we doubt? We need to take some moments and figure that out. Like, yeah, the things of the world distracted me. I became fearful of the perceived reality rather than knowing God has this in his hands and cares about me and can take care of these things. Chris? Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's something we have to progressively work at. It's not easy, right? It's very difficult. Yeah. Yep. He turns to the right place. Yeah, absolutely.
Too, that our brain takes over, and I mean, like for Peter,
Yeah.
once you're walking on the water and you stop and think, wait, people can't walk on water. I
Right.
mean, that's an impossible thing, and
Yeah.
that's where your downfall starts, is thinking that it can't be done. I think,
Yeah.
nothing's impossible with God, but we don't. It's hard for our brain to overcome that, I think.
It is. Yeah. We kind of have to get out of our own way, don't we? Yeah. Thinking, a lot of times we don't do things because we think we're inadequate to the task, or we stop doing things because it feels overwhelming. And there can be moments that that's appropriate, but the power is never in us to accomplish things for God's kingdom, to act out our faith. The results of that are never in our power. What happens in the world is not within our power. It's within God's power, and we have an effect on that through prayer and how we live our lives and how we teach others and so forth. But ultimately, it's God, right? And we need to rely on that, to rest in that. Yeah. Right. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. That's definitely true. Yeah. To accept the answer of God sometimes when, well, that's not the way I would have done it. Yeah. I, yeah. Nor mine. But I think God always says better. I have something better. Right? John? Hmm. 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 Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a powerful message. And I think a powerful question to, yeah, why do we doubt? And how can we need kind of an after action review to figure out why we doubt and how to address that for next time. Phil? Interesting. Yeah. 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 Yeah, absolutely. They're still in the storm at that moment. Yeah. Yeah. Well, Gene? Oh. Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. 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 Yeah, I love this painting. We had it hanging over in the old auditorium for a little while. Aaron Spong did it, and I took that one home with me with his permission. So that one hangs in my home, kind of on the sort of on the second floor, so I can look down from the water up to just. As I said, I love this story. Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. As they get in back into the boat, Jesus and Peter climb back into the boat. And interestingly, the scriptures say that the disciples willingly let them back into the boat. They've changed their minds about this ghost by now, and they come and they worship Jesus, and they declare, "You are the Son of God." Right? You're the very nature of the Father. Um, an extremely powerful admission from Jews, right? Sure, they had their problems with idolatry and the false gods before, but they had to go through a lot of terrible things, the exile and everything, and God has largely cured them of that kind of idolatry, and so they understand you only worship God, right? And here, Jesus accepts their worship as the Son of God. Some will sometimes claim that Mark doesn't have a very high theological portrayal of Jesus, but while this incident of Peter walking on the water is not recorded in Mark, even though it's probably told from Peter's perspective, which is interesting. Throughout all of the Gospels, we see a very high theological portrayal of Jesus. Well, there's one more miracle that happens on the waters that night, or that morning, really. Because as soon as they get into the boat, the winds cease, the weather's nice, and they arrive at the shore. After struggling for 9 hours or so, they arrive at the shoreline. And I want to take a moment to paint this picture, because you can kind of put it together from the scriptures, and I think it's extremely beautiful. It's very powerful when you see what's going on here. Now, John, at the feeding of the 5,000, has told us the Passover of the Jews was near. So it seems like it's early spring, perhaps late March, early April. The weather is nice because it's just calmed down. Evidently, dawn is just breaking over the horizon behind Jesus, because he's now on the western shore. And Jesus is about to step off the boat into Gennesaret. Now, Gennesaret, the name means the garden of the prince, or the garden of riches. Some people say the garden of God. which is kind of the way the rabbis would sometimes refer to it. And this is an extraordinarily beautiful place. This is the crown jewel, the paradise of the Sea of Galilee. Sometimes it's called the Sea of Chinnereth, which was kind of the Greek name for this area applied to the whole sea. This is a garden that's fed by 4 major springs. These springs that come up and water everything, kind of a natural irrigation. It's some of the most fertile land on the planet. It's square miles of cultivated land. And Josephus tells us they're growing all kinds of things. They have walnuts, they have figs, they have palms, they have olives, they have miles of vineyards for the grapes, among a variety of other fruits. And now Jesus comes ashore in the morning, walking through the garden in the cool of the day. What does that image bring to mind for you? Yeah, the creation, right? There was a garden in the beginning, right? And God walked among his people. God walked among his people in the cool of the garden, this beautiful paradise area. Well, not only is he doing that, but the people, I say it's dawn is breaking because the people of that area recognize him. And, not being with him all the time, they probably needed some light to do that, I would presume. So they recognize him. They say, oh, Jesus is over here. And word spreads like wildfire again. They start regathering the crowds. They're bringing all they're sick, they're lame, they're diseased, and they're lining the streets with people. And here comes Jesus, up the marketplace, down Main Street. And evidently these people have heard about the woman with the issue of blood, right? Because the sick people are lining the streets, Jesus is walking down, and they're just touching the hem of his garment and being healed. Boom, 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 boom. Jesus leaving cries of exuberant joy in his wake. Right? I can picture this. This is not the procession of an earthly king like the people wanted to make him the night before. Right? This is not some earthly king. This is the King of Kings walking through his people, healing them. Right? Evoking the original garden, undoing the curse from the original garden, and healing his people. Are there any comments, questions, or criticisms this morning? I always appreciate your comments. We always have a good discussion. I enjoy it. All right, well, I've got to let everybody go, but thank you very much.